Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Craig, absolutely fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Guy.
Just want to check that you think you've come to the right meeting. There are so many Zoom things going on these days that you may have turned up for something else. So I'd just like to check that bit.
It won't surprise you to learn that I don't attend too many Zoom calls. I'm mostly on Google Meets. So this stands out.
Yeah, there you go. You see, that's it. Yeah, good point. Well made. See what you did there. So on that note, I obviously know who you are because I've invited you on, and it'd be just great to just get a sense of who you are and the organization that you work for.
So I'm Craig. I am the Director of Strategy and Operations at Google in the UK and Ireland. So that means I work with a leadership team here to write the strategy for the business, and then the operations side, hopefully execute against that strategy. So it is what it says on the tin. It's kind of what most traditional companies would call a combination of the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Strategy Officer. At Google, we roll those two into one.
Okay. So thanks for that. We're not going to get too much into that space because I think we've got other things that we want to talk about. I came across you as these days, complete strangers sort of start messaging you out of thin air, thanks to, LinkedIn and things like that. So I was one of those people where I saw a post that you'd put on, and I made a comment, which is I'd love you to come and talk about it on the podcast. And so I'm just going to take a moment and read it out, actually, just to let everybody else know what it is. So you wrote, my one takeaway from the hundreds of interviews I've conducted at Google, there isn't much intersection between what businesses need and what the school system teaches. Some of our most successful candidates had average grades, didn't do the best at didn't go to the best schools, had great street smarts, and many less successful candidates knew how to ace the interview, went to the most famous schools, yes, the two you're thinking of, had a slate of A's, but lacked creativity, which I'm fascinated by that. I'm certainly not suggesting that school and university are obsolete or unimportant. They can teach vital academic and social skills, and I deeply believe teachers are our heroes. But the link between exceptional grades and being a valuable employee at a modern business is, in my opinion, less clear. What do you think? Boom. So that was an absolute corker. So I'd love to talk about that. So what triggered it? What triggered it?
Well, genuine reflection. Certainly, as I hope the post is clear, not about school bashing or university bashing, far from it. I went to university, my son's at university, and I think many great people that I've worked with come from that background. It was more a commentary on not allowing the ease of hiring from these sources to blind us from other sources of talent. And, for example, at Google right now, we've got more than 100 apprentices. These are people who have come straight out of school. They've got incredibly diverse backgrounds, and they're full of energy. They're hungry. They're quick studies. They learn very quickly, and they just see things from so many different angles that add to the richness of the place. And it takes a little bit more effort, to source from the less traditional paths. But boy, the dividends pay off when you do. It just adds to the richness of a working environment. So really, that was the point that I was trying to make. And I believe LinkedIn's a great platform for engaging in dialogue. And I think I've got the post in front of me. There's just under 1,800 comments, and I have responded to every single one of them. That's where the gold is, when you engage a community on a topic that you feel passionate about.
And I didn't read all 1,800, but got a sense of things. But when you look at that cumulative response, just what was the inherent truths that were coming to you from what people were commenting on?
A lot of agreement, and that's great to hear. So it gives you a sense that you're not alone in the world, sort of thinking like this. But the comments that I find most interesting and engaging, the ones that are critical actually, and offer a different view. So there were a lot, for example, around that picked up on this notion that universities and schools are academic institutions, and their role is to help people understand knowledge of the world, and it was really the end was academia as opposed to preparing people for jobs. That's a really interesting and totally valid line of thought. So it's those opposing views that I find really interesting.
So I really resonated with it for a number of reasons. One is I left school with 3 O levels at U grade and a kick up the arse for a whole load of reasons, that we could talk about, that go to broken family and all of that, and all the way through to having a little boy with autism and just seeing how his mind works, etc. So I've really come to, and then having worked in the leadership development space, asking HRDs, what's the correlation between somebody having a first and being successful, or somebody having gone to university and being successful? And actually, even though, of course, people that come from sort of the standardized educational backgrounds are successful, just as many aren't. So it's not so much that you can't be, it's just that there doesn't seem to be an inherent kind of correlation. And I guess, where do you think people are in letting that go? I wonder, that stereotype. I mean, you said the ease of hiring from there. I think that's quite interesting, because it's almost a quasi pre-prepared kind of place and space. But what's that sense of organizations letting go of and believing that we don't need to source from there? Has that been for Google? Has that been that was an easy sell at Google, or has that been something that's only been relatively recent?
I think the thing about schools, and this is a comment on the system. Let me be clear: the system, not the people in it. Right? I believe teachers are our heroes, as I said in the post, and it's the most noblest of professions, in my opinion. But in the school system, as it stands at the moment, in most places, not all places, we teach and nurture a very narrow band of intelligence. We live in a world of constant change, where we never will develop mastery, right? Because things change so quickly. So we're in this constant cycle of embracing ambiguity and kind of figuring it out. Yet in the school system, it's about largely imparting knowledge, stuff that other people have found out, and then subjecting students to the ordeal of examination. So starting with something that somebody else found out, learning it, and then regurgitating it in timed test, and then punishing the failure through the marking system. And if you set out to come up with a system less suited to today, I think you'd be hard pressed to come up with anything less suitable. In today's age, I think it's the people who sort of embrace and get excited by the ambiguity, by not knowing the answer, and by figuring it out through the expression of creativity. In business, we call that innovation. In the arts, we call it creativity with a capital C. But figuring it out through a process of experimentation and iteration. So it's kind of the antithesis, right? It's starting without knowing the answer, failing where failure is a necessary and important part of the process, and tuning as we go. And that's how modern organizations, whether they're business for-profit organizations or society-based organizations, go. And if you don't do that, then it's a very rapid path to obsolescence. So I think the starting point is what's helpful. And if you've been through, let's say, the University of Life, and you've had a hard upbringing, or you've had a condition that causes you to think in a different way, like autism, then you're going to see the world through different eyes, and you're going to think about problems, the same set of facts as you and I see, in a different way. And it's that sort of breadth, that neural diversity, that adds to the richness of the innovation that results. I think to your direct question, the system is built to propagate orthodoxy, and this is our orthodoxy. The system that I've described is our orthodoxy. It hasn't really changed materially since the Industrial Revolution, where it was important that we developed a baseline level of numeracy and literacy so that factory workers could all be on the same type of level when they entered into the production line. But that was a long time ago, and things are different now. I think far-sighted companies and other organizations see this, and they do take the effort to hire a more diverse set of skills.
And I wonder if you see an advert for a job and it says, degree preferred or something along those lines. I just wonder, when you're talking to peer level people, do you have a sense that they'd like to go that path, but actually there's a sense within the organization that people are still looking for that, or actually no, there's a real, do you know what, why are we even bothering with that at all? Why not just have a job description and, the background and the history, can we put a criteria on there which is indicative of maybe experience or actual achievement or potential, as opposed to, must be able to do the following and list a fundamentally untrue set of kind of competencies that are being looked for, that you go, well, does this person actually even exist? And I just wonder what you're finding, as in, I'm a lone voice here, or no, I noticed this, so I think people are moving towards it. And even if you think there's a resistance and why people might not want to make that step. I think I'm interested in why people might fear making it. I think I see within. I don't know if you've frozen there, Craig. Oh, hello.
Well, I think
we froze you there for a moment. Lost you. We got you back. There we go.
I'm here. Yeah. I mean, I think I can understand why these requirements appear. It's a heuristic. It's a shortcut. That makes the process a little bit easier. In the same way as, if you're a keen wine buff, you'd probably scroll down and look at an expensive bottle and think, okay, well, that's a sort of easy, lazy marker to quality. Or if I want running shoes, I'll go for one of the big brands because I kind of know it. But what you miss is that those hidden gems. Certainly not a single role that I have hired for in the almost 5 years that I've been at Google requires a degree. Generally, we will say under requirements, a bachelor's degree or equivalent practical experience. And there are many, many examples of equivalent practical experience. Obviously, you want a set of skills and capabilities that are going to be suitable for the job. But you often find the diamonds in that zone, as opposed to the more orthodox zone. I talked already about the apprentices that we've taken on, and they're just fantastic, and they don't have degrees.
I almost wonder if somebody could just write, if you think you can do it, apply.
Well, exactly. Exactly. And you know what? I don't know about you, Guy, but when I read a CV, CVs are still classically the things. A lot of people doing video CVs there. My eyes go all the way down to the bottom, because that's generally where it is. To the section that hopefully lists out what they're doing outside work or education, their interests. They're a volunteer. They've climbed a mountain. They have a business interest that they sort of started on the side. That tells you a lot more about who the person is, as opposed to what they've done or where they've studied, which I don't think are particularly relevant.
Yeah, so there's something, isn't there, about, as I prepare my 7-year-old and my 9-year-old for that future, and that I notice there are different parents with, we've got some friends who are sending their children to a Steiner school, which is that almost self-regulated learning place, which go back 20 years would have been seen as some sort of hippie-esque kind of, what's wrong with you? Why would you send your child there? Almost, but now actually was almost where we're going potentially. It's fascinating, all the way through to the private educated kids who are doing 4 hours of homework a night because that school has got an educational standard that it needs to maintain at all costs. And that me looking at that sort of buffet of possibilities for my kids and thinking, rightio, it's not quite as clear cut as just, well, we'll go there. There's quite a sense of what am I preparing them for without living their lives for them. So how do I best get them ready? So it's a fascinating set of possibilities now, I think.
Yeah, totally. And Steiner School, Montessori is another example that's been around a long time and kind of does things in a different way. There aren't too many examples of really sort of non-mainstream alternatives. And what I'd also say is it takes a very brave parent to feel like they're sort of rolling the dice with their child's future, taking a punt to put them outside the rails of what the system requires. And it's all very well me talking about it, but my kids have been through the classical education system in the UK. It's had a lot of benefits, but it's also had a lot of shortfalls. I'll give you one example. My eldest, when he was studying in his A-levels, did business studies. And I said, fantastic, when are you going to start a business then? He said, oh, no, we don't do that. What do you mean you don't do that? No, we're doing case studies on Tesco and British Airways and things like that. Great companies, obviously. But I just think it's a missed opportunity not to be much more experiential and experimentation orientated in the way that we teach. It's so easy these days to do that. And I think there just needs to be some more options. I felt very passionately about that. It's very easy to say what's wrong, by the way.
Yes.
It's harder to offer an alternative that's pragmatic and executable. And that's what I tried to do when I wrote the book, Playful Curiosity.
Well, funny you should say that, because for those of you that can see this, boom, and I'll put it in the link below, Playful Curiosity, a manifesto for reinventing education by Fenton. Now, this is, I'll hold it sideways. So this is not a, you need to lose yourself over a 4-month period reading intervention. It is, I think, well, you tell me what it is. You tell me what it's about rather than me say.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like an extended post on LinkedIn, I think. It's more of a pamphlet than a book. And but look, why expand the number of pages to say what you need to say if you don't need to do that? And what I wanted to do with the book is, first of all, offer not only an observation about what's flawed or perhaps weak in the system at the moment, but offer an alternative. So, and here's an idea, and put myself out there, take a risk, and expose the debate and counterpoints that may exist. But really, I think anything in writing of this nature, whether it's a post or a short manifesto that I wrote, is about starting a dialogue, and that's where the importance lies. I have a view. It's just one view. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just a view. But if it provokes thinking and debate and dialogue on a topic I believe is really important, then the purpose has been served. And I kind of felt so moved by this, as a parent, as well as a technology leader. I wanted to put it down on paper and see what other people thought. And people have definitely told me what they think. Some agree and some disagree. But that's the important thing. The debate is out there.
And what is the counter argument to? Because you're not saying break the system. You're not saying up the revolution. Shut schools. You're saying, look, where the heck would we be without teachers? Literally probably one of the most important jobs that exist, because, hey, I want to say children are the future, but hey, it is what it is. So what's the counter argument to, or what do people give you back as a kind of counterweight to your thoughts?
Sometimes it's the role of school and education in general is not to prepare people for the outside world for what they then do. That's a pretty common argument. It's about academia for the sake of academia. There's others to say, well, hang on a second, there's the sort of propagation cycle that we talked about earlier. This is what companies expect, and do you really want to roll the dice as a parent and give them what they don't expect, and take a risk on somebody else's life, and probably the person that's most close to you in your life, your child, etc. That's more of a inertia argument, I would say, than a sort of substantive one. And I think it's definitely true that there is a role. Like, I'm definitely not saying shut down schools. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying there's an opportunity to reinvent the way we educate. It's always going to be true and helpful that you need some foundation stones in place. Like, we need to be able to do maths. We need to be able to communicate in writing and orally. So that there's some foundation stones, those sort of classical STEM subjects that are very important, because that lifts you to a sort of baseline level. But that's pretty much in place fairly early on in the teenage years. And I think there are a lot of other skills that can be nurtured along the way that are kind of just sort of pushed into the corner and forgotten about as these sort of interesting, dalliances that sit off to the side but aren't really important. Creativity, I think, is one of them. And Sir Ken Robinson, rest in peace, said this so brilliantly, schools kill creativity. And it was a comment, really not school bashing by Sir Ken. It was a comment that there is a very wide spectrum of human intelligence, and we happen to focus on a very narrow part of that when we educate. And but either intentionally or unintentionally, we dilute and diminish other types of intelligence. There's tactile intelligence, there's sort of physical intelligence, the way that you can express yourself. There's creative intelligence in the form of the arts. There's emotional intelligence, those social skills that are so important. And I think these are kind of just like they sit ambiently in the background and they're not explicitly taught. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we need to move away from the sort of punishment through failure and actually treat failure as a core part of the system that we want, because that gives you a mindset of risk-taking experimentation led through your own curiosity. So the TLDR on my book is we need to be curiosity-led. Montessori and Steiner are very good with that. We're all innately curious. Let's celebrate the joy of finding out. Second, that we need to be experimental in the way that we teach and learn. So replace the exam with the experiment. Start with what you don't know and go from there, rather than what you do know and then write it down. And then build in these sort of practical experiences as part of the workplace. The anecdote that I gave about my son, rather than teaching him about British Airways, ask him to go start a company, form the company. Here's 30 quid to do it, build a website for it, and then go find customers. That's a much better way of learning about business, I think, than sort of reading about what others have done.
I really pick up on this because most of my work is with senior teams, and all of my work is with senior teams. And when I look at the success or failure, occasionally somebody is succeeding massively due to a level of competence that just is absolutely outstanding. They absolutely have got their job nailed on a level that is a superlative. But most people are just good at their job. There's a level of competence, and they're in that level of, I know what I'm doing. So take away the outliers who are just outstanding. Most of us, even probably what I do, am I the best in the world? No. Am I in the box of good at what I do? Yes, I have probably moments where I go, nailed it, but, I'm fundamentally good at what I do. But the success or failure of every single executive I see is around their ability to interact with other human beings, their ability to, and I think curiosity is key, that ability to take on learning at a rate, the Reg Reverend quote, learning at a rate that is equal to or greater than the change that's going on around them. And if you don't have a curious mindset, or you want to confirm your excellence and stagnate and hold that position, but they are great at sort of the interpersonal. They are very good at the self-reflection. Even if they're not accepting of somebody's observation, they're accepting that that's the experience the other person's having. So it's not about agreeing with them, but it's recognizing that that is that's going on for them. And they have a relationship with vulnerability that doesn't make them vulnerable. And I think I noticed that people who, for example, who've had sports backgrounds, they have got better by failing. They've got better by being beaten. They've got better, but the only way they got good was by constant success, but also balanced by constant failure, etc. So nobody really fails. I mean, every now and then somebody fails because of fundamental incompetence. But it's only really because they're not getting on with other people. No other bugger wants to work with them. They haven't got information coming in. They're not curious about what's going on for others. And all they want to do is utilize the standard template that they've got, rather than go, do you know what? I know I've been doing this for the last 20 years, but it might not be the answer. And I think that comes off or is the output almost of the things that you're talking about. So what would we need to do educationally to enable that? Because actually, most of the time, we can kind of show you how to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm picking up on.
Yeah, it's a great point. You talk about the sort of the few people who are, most people are sort of competent at what they do, and some people are great at what they do. Excuse me. What's common in both of these things is that somebody is doing what they know. They've found out, somebody else has taught them, they've learned themselves, and they're expressing their skills in a set of rails that they understand and know well. Well, that's great and necessary, and most companies or organizations will have an element of that. But I think what separates the good from the great is the ability to navigate the unknown. Yes. So what do you do when you don't know what to do? And actually, all of us went through this as a global population, didn't we, during the pandemic? We've never faced this before, not the generation that's alive today. Anyway, what do you do if you're a physical shop and you can't open your doors anymore? What do you do if you're a restaurant and you can't accept diners anymore? And we just saw the most wonderful expressions of innovation of people literally navigating the unknown. And if you're in a business, right, and you come across crises and unknowns all the time, the essence of good business is about this sort of humility, this relentless restlessness to move yourself into unfamiliar territory and lead as opposed to follow. If you've got these people around you who are comfortable navigating the unknown, doing what they don't know, then that's a great team to have by your side.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of the in work or the vocational expression of what we've been discussing from an educational point of view.
There's this work by it's Rittel and Weber about tame and wicked, and that this idea that you've tamed things, which is why you can be good at them, and then there's these wicked spaces where does anybody know how to do it? Nope. and I think at one end you're right. You've got the systemic things that can go wrong, i.e. COVID lands and nobody knows the system. And then also you've got this interpersonal thing of, on a course, everybody says, well, of course, this is the way you'd approach somebody that's being reasonable. You'd frame it in this way. You use this vocabulary, and then you'd find a connection. But then in the real world, you go, well, Bob's just a bit of a git. and he doesn't want to. So you apply the model, you role play it, you go and seek counsel, you practice, and Bob's still not going to do it. What do you do now? The model now isn't going to help you, because the model's, it's worked probably 80% of the time, but then you've got somebody that doesn't want to play the game. And that's where I get interested, is in, COVID is saying, well, that game you were playing is now no longer true. You've got other human beings that don't want to play the game with you. What do you mean they'd smile in a meeting and say they're going to do one thing and then leave and do something else and have their own kind of agenda? No. It does have, and how do you deal with it? So I think it's not so much, it's how do we enable people in that ambiguity and that innovation and that thinking. I think that is exciting, to have a mindset like that. And I wonder how, if it's even a topic for discussion, how do you nurture it? So you bring somebody into a team, and of course there's a day job, and there's the workload, and there's the timelines, and all of these things are quite easy to kind of agree with when, the sea's relatively flat, but when we're all busy, the good intentions can disappear relatively fast. How do you almost make sure you don't knock that out of somebody, or even?
Well, I think this is such a central question that you're asking, Guy. We did a study at Google actually that looked at the performance of teams within. We all operate in teams, and some teams are good and others are exceptional. And we were trying to kind of decode and understand whether there was a pattern in this, and what was true of these exceptional teams that perhaps was less true in the teams that were just good at doing what they did. And it came down to one thing: psychological safety. So I think the answer to your question is psychological safety. You've got to create a context in which it's safe to fail, in which the people next to you will pick you up off the ground if you trip over, pat you on the back, congratulate you for trying, and push you forward, where you can arrive at the office or wherever you spend your days as your true self, not disguised or concealed in some way as a diluted form of that person. And that can be everything from very superficial markers like what you wear. At Google, for example, our dress code is you need to wear something. That's it. If I don't wear a suit in the weekend, why on earth would I wear one at work? It's some sort of costume. It's not me. So that's a very sort of superficial version of that. But also it's about ensuring that that the people that you have and the minds that they have are active in the workplace. We all have been in those meetings, haven't we, when there are sort of quiet people and there are noisier people in the room. Well, if they're there in the first place, they deserve to be there. They've come through those recruitment filters that we've got. They need to talk. And often in diversity and inclusion, you talk about, diversity as sort of inviting a full breadth of people, neural diversity to the table. And we've talked about that at the moment. And then inclusion is ensuring that they get to dance. There's no point in having them there if they can't then participate and know that they will be listened to, even if they feel perhaps uncomfortable in a public setting. They're a little bit more introspective. They're introverts. You've got to draw those people out and make sure their voices are heard. So there's lots of sort of tips and techniques for doing that. I ran my meetings for a time when I thought the psychological safety had dipped by starting by celebrating glorious failures, and I spoke first. Here's what I really stuffed up this week. This is why I stuffed it up. This is what I learned from it. And then we went around the table. It sort of sets the tone. Through piloting and experimentation, having that as a normal part of the business. Now, obviously, you don't want to sort of pilot and experiment with a sort of life or death safety feature. You probably want to take a more measured approach to that, but that's a very narrow class of narrow category. And by celebrating not just the successes, but especially the failures, because they're markers that people have taken risks to push the boundary and got themselves into uncomfortable unknowns and learn something from it. And, that's really, really important to pick up on those things and say, hey, here's something we tried. It didn't work. Here's what we learned from it. And usually there are golden nuggets in every failure that you then harvest and use as part of something successful that then follows.
See, I'm fascinated by, of course, ultimately, failure can lead to you having a problem. If you are, but also the ability to admit that failure is what will enable you to move forward. And it's a very interesting space. And I noticed this, I've mentioned this a lot on podcasts, but I did a brief bit of work with the fire brigade and things like that. And of course, you've got tip of the spear kind of personalities. They're running into the building when you're running out. So, they are of a particular, type. And there's an element of, I was almost saying bravery at one point to one of the guys that was training there. And he said, well, there are moments where we're brave, but you can't, it's not a job where you turn up and you just brave all day, because that would be exhausting. He said, but what we are is incredibly well trained. And we're incredibly well trained through the recognition of what is or isn't working. So there's no place for, of course, we all have our egos per se, but there's no place for you protecting yourself from your failure. So what you actually have is these kind of alpha personalities, but they're not a caricature of it. They're incredibly driven and incredibly vulnerable at the same time. They will literally go, well, I completely bugger that up, and they'll offer that, or they'll go, before any said anything, I know, and they offer it, and they have an entire culture of vulnerability, because it's the only way that, hey, we might be doing another one of these in 2 hours. So if there is a correction, and I think what I notice is, and I'd just like your thoughts on this, is I've noticed that in places like emergency services, where they might be doing another one in 20 minutes kind of thing, there is no room for your ego. But in the commercial sense, where there's no life or death, there's more ability to protect oneself, because the environment isn't demanding it of you in the same way. And I'm quite interested by, if I keep admitting my failures, do I not end up being sacked? All the way through to, no, you've got, and that's what people fear, right? I've only just started. I can't tell them I'm rubbish, or whatever. And it's creating that psychological safety. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. I mean, I think it's only brave if it's risky to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's only brave if it's risky to be vulnerable. And that's a statement of the context and culture that exists around you. You see this a lot. You mentioned the emergency services. You see this a lot in sort of high risk industries. Aviation. I've got a private pilot's license, so I'm trained to fly planes. And in the aviation industry, even the most minor of incidents is documented, it's recorded, it's analyzed, and there's a feedback system. And that's why, by the way, it's much safer to fly a plane than it is to drive a car. It's this sort of systemic cycle of learning. You see it also if you read books of great military leaders. A pattern that you will see is that after a sortie or an event, the team will debrief, and they will go around and they will talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what we learned from it. So you see the signals of this in high performing teams, where you've got to get it right. And getting it right is about getting it wrong sometimes, and actually talking about that in a very explicit way and giving people permission to do that. So I think it's only brave if it's risky to do that, and it's only risky if there's an absence of psychological safety, or the level of psychological safety is lower than it should be.
So there's something here about, if your vulnerability enables learning and your learning enables you to move forward, then the chances are you're pretty safe. If you're not wanting to be vulnerable, you're not going to learn, therefore that's going to cause you your own problem. But if you're vulnerable and playing the game and willing to, but you don't have the motivation or the competence to get better, yeah, there is, then you may end up in a space that you're not going to be comfortable with. And that's, I guess, where that confidence or that belief that I am getting better, or I am able to, for younger people, I think that's very interesting. When I come across people that are of an age And this, I mean, psychological safety is a relatively new term for a lot of people. You know, it didn't exist. You know, I'm 52, so I don't remember that ever being a phrase when I was doing my first manager on first appointment, you know, kind of courses, you know, back when I was 20 something, psychological safety. You know, that would have been a little bit, what are you? Are you a hippie? you know, just etc. So I think when you've got people of an age, this changing, that's the big thing. That when you're 18 and you're learning about it, hey, I'm a sponge. Hey, if that's what we're doing here, then hey, why not? But if I'm in my late 40s, if I'm in my early 50s, and you're asking me to offer something that I haven't done in 2 or 3 decades. I always had to be the strong one. I had to show the world. I believed I was taught like that. That's where I think that's very, not even that people are resistant. It's very difficult for people to do it. Some resist. And I'm interested in the difference that you may see between the youth maybe accepting that through to maybe more mature people going, oh, at last, thank goodness, versus some going, I don't really know how to do it, you know, because I remember back in the day, if you admitted to something going wrong, you know, or they've come from environments and joined Google, but in the last 2 or 3 places they were at, you know, if you said you were wrong, you know, let me know how that worked out for you, you know. So I guess you see all of that. I don't know if that's something that you do recognize.
Yeah, well, change is difficult for all of us, myself included. And yes, if you're used to doing things in a certain way with a set of norms around you, and then you step into an environment that's different, that can be very uncomfortable until it's not. And it's kind of sort of bringing us full circle, isn't it, back to education and sort of traditional ways of educating versus alternative ways of educating. I think you're right to say that children are perhaps more sponge-like. They've got less iron cast ego tendencies, but they're also more vulnerable to peer pressure and the sort of set of social norms that are perceived around them. Though if you look at a toddler or a baby, they're fearless, right? They don't care. If they don't know what it is, it goes in the mouth and they sort of taste it. And you know, there's art that's interesting, and the stick figures with no bodies and all that sort of stuff. But that tends to diminish, doesn't it, as they become aware of themselves and, more importantly, aware of those around them, and these sort of social norms start to develop. And that, I think, is reinforced and propagated somewhat by traditional education, where this idea of disseminating knowledge and then testing relentlessly, and then punishing failure through the system of scoring somebody on how well they've referenced or regurgitated what somebody else has told them. You know, it kind of reinforces that cycle to some extent. So I think there's more we can do in that context, both as young adults as well as older adults, to make it okay to experiment, to make that a normal thing, not a brave thing, but a normal thing, you know, that is rewarded, and where failure is celebrated. And I think if we're doing more of that at school, then it will become more normal to do that in the workplace as well.
I like that idea. I think there's something about, we have to talk about a thing. You know, there's a statement that, you know, what gets talked about, you know, conversations change culture. So what I'm really hearing about here is that you're putting that out there. You're waving, you know, not just you, but you're waving a flag to say, hey, listen, you know, this is a conversation point. And the more familiar we get with thinking about it, it's not about up the revolution, let's all change tomorrow, though that might be a beautiful thing. But the reality is there are people in senior roles who, and if you're in organizations, the organization is the kind of organization that's being looked at. I have a role in that organization, therefore it has a platform. So actually, what can I do that has a kind of social responsibility, which I also sense I feel within you, that is, you know, it's not for my organization per se, but actually it enables everybody. And, you know, we reap the rewards of that if we start to see that talent and mindsets start to shift. So it feels as if there's a rallying cry there to start to think and have these conversations.
Yeah, 100%. And, for your listeners and watchers, I would encourage you to just on the back of this, try doing one thing today where you express vulnerability by talking about something that you took a risk on and failed and what you learned from it. Just try doing that once and see what happens. And ask the people around you who observe it for their feedback. Let a day pass or so and then say, hey, I tried this new thing. What did you think? How did it make you feel? How did it change your perception of me? Try that experiment, see what happens.
Now, in the time that we've got, I would like to hear a little bit about Coffee, Eggs and Inspiration.
Coffee, Eggs and Inspiration is the name of my podcast, which mostly is a YouTube channel these days. I've got some interview-based content that are also available on audio, on whatever channel you listen to, Spotify, etc. Coffee, Eggs and Inspiration. Yeah, I make a rule to meet one or two new people every week. Guy, nice to meet you. And actually, we met last week, didn't we? It just occurred to me that I often get the chance to speak to really interesting people like yourself, and wouldn't it be great to record that and share it? If I can have at least one other person experience what I just experienced, I've doubled the value of it. So that was kind of the starting point. Generally, I have breakfast meetings. I'm a morning guy, at least pre-COVID, hence the coffee and eggs. That's generally what I have for breakfast. And then the inspiration came from my counterpart. The channel's since expanded, and there's a bit of lifestyle stuff in there, largely driven by COVID. It was just me sort of talking about some of the stuff that I do that I thought might be interesting. But mostly it's a hobby, it's a passion of mine. It's a chance to express creativity and put myself out there in a risky way and get the full feedback, the full wrath of feedback. And I enjoy that. I find it interesting.
I think what I also like about talking to you is I recognize this more and more in people, that there is less value in having a single vertical skill set. I am just to say an FD or whatever, and that's all I do. That's all I think about. That's all I am. And I define myself by my role and my position and the organization that I work for versus, no, I'm many things. And I also happen to be here. And I think that's a very interesting role modeling that, we are the sum parts of who and what we are. There are lots of things we can talk about. And if you have a life lesson there, it doesn't leave you there. It comes with you here, right? So the more that you're doing, if you have a growth experience doing that, then we're going to benefit from that. And I think that's when you see a difference. If I'm hearing that's not just who you are, but it's also, I think, something that because you're overtly telling people that that's what you do.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to do that. It's encouraged at Google to have these sort of side hustles and side interests and so on. There are very few jobs or vocations in life that fully satisfy all of your interests. That would be a very unusual thing. So by definition, to live full lives, we need to express and explore those interests that exist outside what our work, our day-to-day work can give us. And it's easier than it's ever been. If you've got a smartphone and an idea, you can start a micro multinational business and a little side hustle business. You can become a creator and reach a global audience and engage that audience, whether it's on a social platform like LinkedIn in our case, or YouTube, as is the case in the podcast. It's just going to make you happier and a better, as you rightly say, Guy, a better person in the thing that you do most often, which is your day job.
So just as we come to a close, I see a beautiful link there between children being encouraged to not have an education that is vertical, but actually a very wide spectrum of validity of what makes them, I guess, and that to be encouraged from their curiosity. You can pick things up and put them down. You might come back to them 2 years later, but you don't have to make life decisions at 9 or whatever it is that are going to set you on a very linear path. So there's something about that then comes back to what you're doing, and the environment that you're in is encouraging. So I definitely see that. And I think that's very powerful. So just before I let you go, I would love to know if somebody came up to you and said, Craig, tell me a book I should read, or a podcast I should listen to. And you can't obviously say your own. But, what would you say? Because I've got one book that I always get, quite a few books, but I've got two that I would go, look, if you haven't read these, you should definitely give them some time. What do you offer the world in that way? Well, this podcast is, definitely worth listening to, because it's a great format for stuff. What would you
podcast wise, I often listen to How I Built This by Guy Raz. It's a public broadcast podcast, and it's a story of founders. And it's the story part rather than the sort of business part that's really interesting. It's amazing to hear the trials and tribulations of what it is to sort of take risks, and in some cases prosper, in other cases crash and burn. So How I Built This by Guy Raz, R-A-Z, I think is the spelling of the surname. And book-wise, my little sort of go-to book is called Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh, okay.
It's by Dr. Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese? And it's a wonderful little story about a couple of mice that develop a habit of going back to the same place where they always find cheese, and then one day they don't.
And that's a very easily digestible. It's interesting, isn't it? That, some of these things are they've survived great eons of time. People go, oh, that's an oldie. I go, yeah, but it's a reason why it's still referenced. Because it's still, you can't mess with it. Everybody can understand it. So it's I'd forgotten about that, and that's a great one to definitely pay attention to. So listen, I'm going to get you to just stay on for a couple of moments just before when we finish, just to make sure everything's doing what it should do. But just from me, from my mother who's listening to this, and hopefully somebody else, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on this episode.
You're welcome, Guy, and hello to Guy's mum.
Indeed. That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness, and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.